Got a lot to go over today. Rumors are flying, and Tarik Skubal officially accepts his Cy Young Award. We'll talk about all of that all today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Monday, January 27th, 2025. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off of your first purchase. Welcome in. Hope you all had a fantastic weekend. We have a bunch to go over. You know, for as slow of a news week last week was, they really made up for it with a lot of rumors and news and notes just absolutely flying over the weekend. We have the Tigers are interested in Carlos Estevez. We'll talk about the profile of pitcher he is, where he fits in to the bullpen. We have more Bregman updates because, of course, we do. We have a Ryan Presley situation in Houston that the Tigers were linked to for about 5 minutes. Jack Flaherty reunion. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Then the big one is the Mets apparently are interested in trading for Spencer Torkelson, or at least considering that an option if they don't re-sign Pete Alonso. More prospect lists came out. The Tigers, one of two teams with two players in the top 10. And of course, Tarik Skubal officially accepts the American League Cy Young Award for the 2024 season. We'll talk about that and more. Let's start off with Carlos Estevez. Okay. This fit makes all the sense in the world, and I think it is something that, I don't know. I mean, we talked about him for maybe 5 seconds earlier in the offseason, back at, the end of the fall, but this makes a lot of sense. Estevez is, I believe, 32 years old and is a flamethrower, can get up to 97, 98, 99 miles an hour with his fastball. Has a slider and a changeup. This past season had a 2.45 ERA in 54 games with the Phillies and with the Angels. Had a whip under 1, a 0.91 whip. And a large reason for that drop in whip, and a large reason why I think the Tigers are expressing interest in him, is because he cut his walk numbers considerably. Goodness. This is a guy that pretty much for his whole career was sitting around 3.5 to 4.5 when it comes to walks per 9. And this past season was sub 2, easily the lowest walk rate of his career. Improved that, like I said, dramatically. Just from 2023 to 2024, he went from the 17th percentile in baseball, so bottom 5th of the league, in terms of the amount of walks he allowed at 11% on the year. Anything over 10%, you're talking about a guy who is kind of, at best effectively wild and at worst just wild. This past year was 5.7%. That is 86th percentile. That is a massive swing. That is a 70 percentile swing from one season to the next. Now, he's not a perfect pitcher, as nobody really is. This is a guy that when the ball is hit, when the hitter does make contact with a Carlos Estevez pitch, it is almost always hit in the air and hit relatively hard. But he has the ability to miss bats, kind of been all over the place in whiff rate and K rate in his career. But this past year was a little bit better than league average in both of those, and has had years where he's spiked and been, toward the top of the sport in those categories. And that is to be expected with a guy that throws as fast as he does. Right-handed pitcher, if I didn't say that already, I think this just makes a lot of sense. A guy that can miss bats, can throw hard, Obviously, in a perfect world, you'd like him to keep the ball on the ground. He has never been a high ground ball rate guy. He always has been a fly ball first type of pitcher when the ball is put in play. But for the Tigers, that is a luxury that they have, and it's one of the reasons why I wasn't one of the people that was super loud about like you have to bring the fences in a ton. It kind of makes it unique, and it makes it a little bit more attractive, and also just a little bit like more digestible for pitchers that are coming in from the outside that maybe give up more fly balls. Now, that's not to say that it's just you give up fly balls, you're going to succeed here, right? Kenta Maeda, we talked about, was a big fly ball guy the year before he became a Tiger, and he had a brutal 2024. I think sometimes a little bit too much weight is put into like park factors as well. But as a whole, this is already way too much time spending talking about the dimensions. We're talking about the player, okay? And this is a guy that I think would fit into the mix here really well. He instantly becomes one of your highest leverage reliever, if not your highest. This is a guy that almost has just under 60 saves over the last 2 seasons, had 31 in 2023 and 26 in 2024. Obviously was acquired at the deadline by the Phillies this past year to be one of their high leverage relievers, as they had a lot of injuries and were just kind of bulking up for the postseason. So yeah, I think this makes a lot of sense. And I think that when you're talking about the stuff that Estevez has and the fact that he cut his walk rate so much, this is kind of a Chris Fetter dream scenario, right? Like I think Fetter, London, Nieves are gonna be. By the way, how awesome is it that all 3 of those guys are back? Like that was you couldn't have convinced me that back in October that all 3 of these guys would have been back in 2025, and here we are. Really cool. Just a quick sidebar. So I think that those 3 guys are going to be kind of salivating at this profile again for the 50th time with the velocity, the really good bite on the slider that he has, and then kind of a changeup to offset left-handed hitters as well to make him effective against both righties and lefties. This past season, obviously numbers were a little bit better against lefties, just to be expected in general with most righties these days, but had really solid clips against both and was kind of utterly dominant against righties. Only walked, I think, 12 batters all year. Solid, man. Really, really solid. So that is a reported interest by your Detroit Tigers. And yeah, we'll see if that comes to fruition. I would imagine with the Dodgers taking a lot of the other high-end free agent relievers that Estevez market is probably growing now. I think it's far from a guarantee that the Tigers land him, but a guy that's coming off a career year at 32 years old. He's a reliever, so you don't have to sign him to, a long-term deal. You can sign him to 1 or 2 years. And with the profile he has, I think it makes all the sense in the world, and I would absolutely welcome it. I think he immediately becomes, again, maybe your highest leverage reliever. Genuinely, he might just immediately be the de facto closer, because AJ Hinch refuses to say the word closer in the 2025 season. So we'll keep an eye on that, and hopefully it comes to fruition, because I think that makes a lot of sense. Alex Bregman, we have our daily at this point Alex Bregman updates. We will get to that, as well as some more drama surrounding the Houston Astros, all right after this. Got to talk to y'all today about our friends over at GameTime. I remember the excitement and energy of a playoff game that I attended. Well, it's been a while here in the city. Did not go to a Lions playoff game last year, but I went to the most recent Detroit Pistons playoff game, if you can believe that. And Blake Griffin, their chants in the arena, "Refs, you suck." Blake Griffin carrying and trying to will the Pistons over the Milwaukee Bucks. They get swept, but it was genuinely, my friends and I still talk about it as one of the most fun experiences we've ever had, despite the fact that they got swept. And GameTime can help you be a part of all of those great moments. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2, Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. As always, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back on Wednesday as we keep this January offseason train rolling. Today, we are talking about a lot of different things. We started off by talking about Carlos Estevez. Let's talk about our episodely Bregman update. Over the weekend, the most recent drama with that is just like Houston was like, oh, we're not saying no. Like that was always the case, dude. Like this is my problem with off-season, like just headline watching, is it's like that was never not the case, but it got a little quiet. So we just started running with a new story like that. Oh my gosh. Like I don't have frustration with the media members that are putting it out. Like they have a job to do, and if they get told something, it is their job to report it. Like I know that, and I'm a part of that as well. That's what we're doing right here. But like it is just so frustrating. Just like that. The Astros said 3 months ago, hey, we probably are not going to be able to match the offer that he has or that he's going to get, but we would love him back. That's the only thing that was said over the weekend, was like, oh, the door is still open. That was the big metaphor that we were throwing out there over the weekend. Oh, the door is cracked open. And then like 24 hours later, all the Houston beat writers were like, well, but they don't think they're going to get him. We knew that. Thank you so much. I just want this saga to end. I'm so exhausted. It's almost February. Pitchers and catchers report in a few weeks. I just want this to be over. And a side effect of that report was then all of this scrambling about like, well, now the Astros might trade Ryan Presley because he has a no trade clause, so he has to approve it. But also, like, that would maybe free up some money, and maybe they'd be able to up their Bregman offer, and like, et cetera, et cetera. This is so peek behind the curtain. I'll give you. I was talking to one of my best friends about this scenario over the weekend, and I told him, I was like, my just absolute worst case scenario here is that the Tigers trade for Ryan Presley so that the Astros can free up money and then they sign Bregman. I was like, that is just going to hit like a truck. Like that is just going to be the worst. And that's nothing. Presley's been one of the best relievers. This past year kind of had a roller coaster year, but he's been a really good reliever, back-end reliever in this league for quite some time now. It's nothing against him, and he would have been a great addition to this team. It's just when you have your eyes set on one thing and then you still do a deal with the Astros just so that they can get Bregman back, it would have been kind of a gut punch there. But it was reported by Evan Petzold, who is just on fire this offseason, by the way. Evan Petzold is putting up prime Wilt Chamberlain numbers this winter. Great dude, great everything. Yeah, we love Ev here. But reported within like hours of the speculation that, the Astros are going to ask Presley to waive his no trade clause to go to the Cubs or the Tigers, like buckle up. And then Evan was like, the Tigers have no interest in Presley and they're not trading for him. It's like, all right, well, there goes that. There was a solid like 100 minutes where we were like, oh, maybe 90 minutes of Ryan Presley may be a Detroit Tiger here pretty soon. And then that got shot down pretty quickly. So we won't talk about it too much more. But that was another, rumor and news noteworthy thing that happened over the weekend. Then more Jack Flaherty drama, basically saying that he doesn't think the Dodgers are ruining baseball and that nobody else is doing anything and that's not the Dodgers' fault. And then was also asked about a reunion for the Tigers, which I'm not sure how those two things correlate, but was asked about coming back to Detroit, and it seems like he's interested. He said it would be really cool. It feels like he's down. So we will see what happens there. I don't think it's going to happen. Not to burst anybody's bubble here or spill anybody's Cheerios, but I think the Tigers are pretty content with the amount of starting pitching they have currently, and they have some depth there that goes beyond just a 5-man rotation. And I don't think they are going to invest dollars that could be put elsewhere, specifically on offense, in another starting pitcher. They need at least one more reliever, and they need a bat still, right? And I say need, if they don't get either of those, they're going to be able to field a team. It's just going to be kind of a letdown, and it's really just going to be the same team as last year, plus Gleyber Torres and Alex Cobb. So I think that those should be and are their two biggest priorities. And if they can wiggle in a Flaherty reunion within that, then they will obviously consider that. He was fantastic last year, loves playing here, worked incredibly well with the coaches, and had one of the best years of his entire career in Detroit. I'm sure he would love to come back. But I think he's like third or fourth on the priority list right now. And they're not going to shortchange the amount of money. If Illich has given Harris an exact dollar amount for budget, they're not going to shortchange that or lower their budget for other areas by signing another starting pitcher when they're pretty content with where they're at there. So we'll see what happens. Not completely ruling it out, but I think it's incredibly unlikely. Let's get to the biggest story from over the weekend. And that was that the New York Mets reportedly, from Mets beat writers, have expressed some interest in trading for your Spencer Torkelson. So from the Mets perspective, we'll start with that really quickly. This is something that would, on paper or in theory, indicate that Pete Alonso is probably leaving New York. There's been a lot of rumblings about the Blue Jays, but there's been some other teams that are thrown in there, and the Mets are obviously still going to be big players in Pete Alonso's market, but that is certainly one thing that kind of jumps out at you and would be the only reason they would do this. That's pretty Captain Obvious and self-explanatory. It is not as black and white as just they're going to miss out on Pete Alonso, so they are going to only be interested in Spencer Torkelson, right? I'm sure they are looking at the Tigers and going, well, this is a former 1-1 that had 30 home runs in 2023, plays first base, and literally doesn't have a spot on the Tigers team. I'm sure they're interested in a player that kind of fits those criteria because he probably won't cost very much, and there's some upside still there. But I'm sure they're also interested in 5 to 10 other guys that can play first base, some of which are probably internal. And, it's not just like the Mets are now all in on Torkelson, I guess is my point. Like, I'm sure he's one guy on a laundry list of players that they're going to kick the tires on to see if it makes sense replacing Alonso. Okay, so I want to make that abundantly clear. This isn't just like the Mets are either going to have Torkelson or Alonso at first base, and that's that. From the Tigers' perspective, which is obviously what we care about the most here, on paper, it obviously makes sense for the Tigers to shop Torkelson. Okay, this is a guy that, again, as I just said, doesn't have a starting spot on this team right now. Colt Keith is going to be, by all accounts, unless he has just a disastrous spring training, the opening day starting first baseman. Gleyber Torres is going to be the opening day starting second baseman, pretty much certainly. And that's really the only two positions that affect Torkelson, unless you're going to DH him. And I don't think they are, because they have 4 outfielders that they want in the lineup every day. So I think it does make sense, given the season he had in 2024, for the Tigers to at least listen to other teams that may be interested in Torkelson. But I also don't think it necessarily lines up with too many other teams in practice. And I'll explain why I think that right after this. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in as always. So, talking about Torkelson to the Mets here and the potential of this trade actually happening. Like I said before the break, I'm just not sure there's really a fit in practice, even though it does make sense for the Tigers on paper. And the reason why is this: the Tigers are not going to just give Torkelson away for nothing, despite the fact that there is a portion of the fan base that has been asking for them. Like we have to read about DFA Torque all the time. That like we can get mad and emotional all we want. That's like obviously not going to happen. Okay, so they're not just going to give him up for nothing. He is still pretty young, a former 1-1, although not drafted by the current front office. And the biggest factor here is the potentially, if he reaches even, I think him reaching his ceiling that was believed to be on draft night is kind of out the window. But if he even reaches like a solid starter level, he then becomes the right-handed hitting power bat that this lineup has desperately been looking for. It's been one of the biggest needs for this team for a while on the offensive side of the ball, for sure. So they're not just going to give him away for nothing, but his trade value is extremely low, pretty objectively. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. And the Tigers also, on top of that, don't have a ton of leverage. And not that this is this black and white either, but they don't have a ton of leverage given the fact that the Colt Keith playing first base situation is kind of widely known in public information at this point. So all of those things considered is why I'm just not really sure it lines up. And I'm not really sure how practical that ends up being. The Mets are going to want a buy low candidate that can get that still has somewhat of a high ceiling, that they don't have to pay too much to get. And given the fact that Torkelson literally got demoted last year in the middle of the season, they're not going to overpay for him. He's a first baseman, which inherently is just like not as much value, that got demoted. And while he was better defensively this past year, has been brutal defensively at first base in 2 of his 3 seasons as a major leaguer. So they're not going to spend a ton. And the Tigers' price tag is not going to be nothing. It's probably still going to be like, you're not going to get any top 50 prospects in baseball, probably not even any top 100 prospects in baseball. I'm not saying that the Tigers are going to drive some really hard bargain and need, a king's ransom to part ways with Torque, but I just think there's enough of a separation between what the Tigers would still want in return from him, given his current standing within the organization, and what other organizations are willing to give up, given his actual production over the last calendar year. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the Tigers are just kind of done with him and they're going to be willing to give him up for not a very high price tag. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not in those rooms. I haven't heard anything. But from the outside, that is just the kind of interpretation that I get of this situation. One of the potential trades that was kind of thrown out there by a lot of different people, and I think that this was kind of just both fan bases throwing something at the wall and seeing what would stick, was Brett Beatty for Spencer Torkelson, which is just 2 guys that were former top prospects in baseball and were former first-round picks that crushed in the minors and had really high expectations and just haven't really figured it out at the major league level. Now, Torkelson at least has a 30 home run season under his belt. Brett Beatty has been brutal offensively in his major league career. He has, I think, 3 separate seasons been called up at one point and not hit very well in really any of them, but has clearly been worthy of a promotion from the minors. He has crushed AAA pitching, has crushed minor league pitching, And like I said, was a former, top 50, he might have even got like top 25 prospect in baseball. Is very highly regarded. And he plays third base. And that's why all the Tigers fans were like, hey, third base, maybe a change of scenery helps him out. Change of scenery helps Torkelson out. You know, bada bing, bada boom. Look at that. Works out for everybody. I think, what do I think? I, I don't know if the Tigers would do it, as weird as it sounds. And I think a large reason for that is Beatty is a left-handed hitter. And while, ultimately, if he ends up raking and just turns his career around and starts hitting like people thought he was going to be able to at one point, then the Tigers aren't going to care if he's a righty or a lefty. But he hasn't hit at the major league level ever and is a lefty. Torkelson is a righty power hitter, which the Tigers want, and again, has a 30 home run season under his belt. I think straight up, as funny as it may sound, knee jerk reaction wise, I'm not sure the Tigers would do that straight up. Now, I'm not saying they would ask for like a ton more, like, oh, we need like all your best players too. But I think it's probably relatively close given the way that both of their career paths have gone. But I don't know. I don't know if the Tigers would really be willing to part ways with still what Torkelson could be for what Beatty is right now. Some other prospect rankings drop over the weekend. Baseball America, 2 top 10 prospects in all of baseball the Detroit Tigers have. One of those being Jackson Jobe, the other one being Max Clark. And the Boston Red Sox are the only other team in baseball with 2 top 10 prospects in the sport. The Red Sox should have the number 1 prospect in baseball. I think it's kind of cheating to have like Sasaki as the number 1. Like technically, yes, I get it, but does that like really count? I guess the same thing happened with Ohtani. He was the number 1 prospect in baseball when he first signed too, but just kind of funny to me. So that's kind of a cool thing. Again, we've talked about as these lists come out over the offseason, we've talked a lot about how the Tigers look like they legitimately have one of the better farm systems in baseball, which is awesome. So lastly, Tarik Skubal, rather. I have to read every notification that comes on my phone because I am worried that like some news is going to drop while I am recording. So I'm reading an article that was written about Torkelson, and that's why I said his name. Tarik Skubal officially receives the 2024 American League Cy Young Award at the Writers' Dinner. It was really cool. Give a really cool speech, talked about the Tigers a little bit, the organization. I think the coolest part of the weekend for me was not for like through my eyes. I was not a part of the dinner at all, if that wasn't self-explanatory. The coolest part of the weekend, though, I think was the amount that Major League Baseball really marketed Tarik Skubal. The Tigers have not had a truly like transcendent marketable player since like Verlander and Cabrera. And that's even like prime Cabrera. Obviously, Major League Baseball did you're an all-star, even though you clearly don't deserve it. The second him and Pujols, right? Like they did that whole thing and whatnot. Like they still gave the farewell tour type of thing. Like Miggy was very marketable and Verlander still is, and obviously especially was back when he was, winning an MVP as a pitcher for the Tigers. But it's just really cool to see that again because the Tigers haven't had that in a while. And I think that's why there's the hype that there is around Max Clark as well, because he will instantly become that if he can reach his ceiling. But like they did a whole Q&A where like fans could ask Tarik Skubal questions, and Major League Baseball, the official MLB account was, posting his answers and talking about his speech and there's interviews of him. He was on like 4 podcasts over the last week and was just talking about, his favorite players ever. And like he was asked what how would you do if you faced Barry Bonds, and his thoughts on like the steroid era are now out there. Like it's just and sticky substances, right? Like it's so cool to see him so much in the public eye. And I'm sure that is going to be a negotiation tactic for Boris. Everything that man does is calculated, I'm sure, but just the fan in me is just very pleased with seeing an elite Detroit Tigers player truly be marketed at the biggest level. And like, when you ask anybody in any fan base who are the best pitchers in baseball, all 30 fan bases, like, it's not like our nice little kept secret anymore. It's like all 30 fan bases are well aware that this dude's one of the baddest dudes on the planet. And that's just awesome. Also said he wants Alex Bregman to be a Tiger. And we'll end on that. Said that I think the exact quote was, "I'm sure he would love it." So we'll see what happens with that. 2 Boris clients. We'll see. We'll see what happens there. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back on Wednesday. Really pleased with today's show. This was we had a lot to talk about for a change, which was a nice, like I said, change of pace over kind of the last week. So I'm sorry for maybe talking about the same thing a lot over the last couple of weeks. I promise I'm trying to get you the biggest conversation that is happening, the biggest stories throughout the Tigers organization on an episodely basis. But January is kind of tough. So thanks for bearing with me. Thanks for continuing to support throughout kind of the slow part of the offseason. And hopefully here over the next few weeks, we'll kind of start turning the tide, picking up. Hopefully some moves happen. Tigers can bring in some names, and we start, setting our eyes on pitchers and catchers reporting in 2025. All right. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch you on Wednesday, baby. Go Tigers.